This is the Messiah Revelation Ministry, prophetic end time ministry. Today we are looking at the Israeli-Iranian war. What are the lessons? What are the implications and observations from an African point of view? Does it have any relevance to Africa and Africans and the people of African descent? We are looking at it from these angles and the implication for the end times. Number one is a war that was a proxy war, and it's a proxy war turning into direct confrontation. Israel used proxies to fight Iran for a long time, in the same way that Iran used proxies to fight Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and other um, groups, entities were used by Iran to fight Israel for a long time, and there was no direct fight or war between Israel and Iran. But things changed. The proxy war turned into a direct war on June the 12th, 2025. And you have to look at the history of Iran during the time of the Shah of Iran. Iran was an American ally, and the Shah was overthrown through a revolution, and things changed in Iran. And so the Russians and Americans changed sides. The Shah was supported by America, and after the revolution, um, Iran became a protege, an ally of Russia, and America became an enemy of Iran. And you remember uh, the the capture of American embassy in Tehran, and that is the beginning of the hatred between America and Iran. And Israel, an ally of America, of course, it can be said to be part of the America's proxy war against um, Iran. All of a sudden, we have a direct conflict between Iran and Israel. When we're talking about proxy war, don't forget Ukraine. Ukraine is a proxy war between Russia and America. Ukraine is just a theater of war, and we have to watch the events in Ukraine, watch the events in Iran and Israel, because the lesson we have seen is that a proxy war can eventually lead to direct war, and it has global implications. And of course, Africa is not excluded. When we're talking about proxy wars between the West and the East, between America and Russia, I think the best case that we use to illustrate is the case of Angola. Angola was a Portuguese colony, and it went through protracted a war of independence before Angola became independent. Angola discovered oil, and the oil was managed by Gulf Oil, an American company. And there was a proxy war going on in Angola between America and Russia. And in that war, America was supporting rebels to destroy oil facilities in Angola. And it is unbelievable. America supporting rebels to destroy Gulf oil facilities in Angola, and Angola government uh, cooperated with Cuba, so Cuban troops were guarding Americans' oil facility in Angola, and America didn't care destroying Gulf oil facilities in Angola because America was fighting a proxy war with Russia. Um, Africa's independence was independence from Western colonial imperialists, and Russia and China were supporting the African nations to assert their independence. In the case of Angola, Russia and Cuba were supporting the Angolan government, and America was supporting rebels to overthrow the government. And one of their strategy was to destroy Angola's economy, and oil was a major part of the economy. And so America didn't care to use rebels to destroy um, Gulf oil facilities, even though Gulf oil was an American company, and Cuban troops were defending American company in Angola. And that is an example of the proxy wars, and Africa has a history of that. Africa has been a theater of war supported by outside forces, and America will always protect her interests when it suits her interests. And the case that I will cite with South Africa, America is a democratic country, quote unquote, and ought to support democracy in Africa. But that was not the case in South Africa, apartheid South Africa. As a result of apartheid in South Africa, the US Congress passed a law. The law is called Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, and the law meant to impose sanctions on South Africa because of apartheid. And lo and behold, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act was vetoed by President Ronald Reagan. And Reagan didn't want apartheid to stop in South Africa because, in his own selfish interest, it would be better for South Africa to be in apartheid than South Africa getting independence, where black government in South Africa will be friendly to Russia. So as long as Africa remained under colonial rule, Western colonial rule, it was better for America rather than Africa getting independence and aligning with Russia or China. And of course, the war in Iran, the Israeli-Iranian war, you have to look at it from the perspective of Iran's alliance with China and also with Russia, forming the axis of resistance. And so directly, you see America fighting Iran, indirectly through a proxy, if you call, if you will agree, through Israel. It's part of um, the proxy wars that have led to direct confrontation. Proxy war resulting in direct confrontation. And potentially, if America gets involved officially, of course, unofficially, then it will be a direct war, it will be a proxy war leading to direct confrontation. Um, what are the sympathies for both sides, Iran and Israel? Israel wants sympathy, and from an African perspective, Israel will cast herself as a small nation the size of New Jersey in United States, a small nation surrounded by hostile Arab nations, and Israel has been defending her own um, survival. Is under existential threat. And in 1973, you remember what happened? The Yom Kippur War. On the Yom Kippur holiday, um, the Arab army, they mobilized, and there was a surprise attack on Israel. If you will, you call it a preemptive attack. And that war nearly led to nuclear confrontation between America and Russia, the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And after that war, there was oil embargo. The Arabs imposed oil embargo on all nations, and Africa was compelled to take sides, and most African nations took the side of the Arab nations, largely as a result of the oil embargo. There was a boycott of Israel. And so that is the sympathy that people have for Israel. And from an African perspective, you remember an event, the Entebbe event, where some Palestinians hijacked Israeli plane, and the plane was diverted to Uganda, and Israeli citizens and some other people were taken hostage, and Israel staged a dramatic raid on the airport, the Entebbe raid, and Israel um, actually received the sympathy of so many African nations because of her experience. And so this is how some Africans look at the war. They have sympathy for Israel, and most Africans believe that Israel is the chosen and of God, is a Christian nation, and it is hosting the holy sites, and that is the psychological um, war that Israel is using, casting herself as a small nation surrounded by hostile Arab and Muslim countries, and fighting for her existence, particularly where you hear Iran proclaiming that they want to wipe Israel off the map. And so that's the sympathy that people have for Israel. Of course, the awakening is coming that the true chosen of God, the children of God, they are scattered over the world. And the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, former president of Egypt, he made a statement, and he said that the true children of God, the chosen of God, they left Israel, Palestine, they left there as black people, and they came back as white people. And so that is the feeling of the Arabs and the Palestinians, and of course Iran, that Israel is illegitimate. They call it a Zionist state, an occupying state. And of course, that reflects how they look at Israel, um, trying to delegitimize Israel, knowing very well that the 1948 state, Israel, is not the chosen of God. The awakening is coming. Many Africans in the diaspora, they are being awakened that the chosen of God are scattered over the world. And Isaiah prophecy, Isaiah 11 verse 11 shows where they are, from where they will be gathered by Jesus Christ, the Messiah who is coming. Iran also has sympathy from African nations. And what are the sympathies for Iran? Iran has projected herself as anti-imperialist revolutionary nation, and people are impressed by how a nation under sanction, American sanction, has been able to transform herself, even to the point of projecting power on a global scale. And Iran has sympathy because of her resistance and resilience. And from an African perspective, Iran is part of the axis of resistance, an ally of China, an ally of Russia, and the three nations are projecting themselves as a bloc, a counter-hegemonic bloc, challenging the hegemony of the West, headed by United States. And China, Russia, and Iran, they don't have the baggage of being a colonial power in Africa, and they were not part of the imperialist nations that subjugated Africa and exploited the continent of Africa, exploited their resources. And so that is the sympathy that some people have for Iran. And of course, Iran is a Muslim nation, and we have a large Muslim population in Africa. Nigeria, the most populous nation in Africa, has a large Muslim population, and so you cannot ignore the sentiments and the sympathy that Iran has in a war with Israel. Sympathy. Iran is fighting to transform her economy. Of course, Iran is a theocracy, is not democratic. But from an African point of view, democracy has done worse things in Africa, and the West has the West has not actually lived up to expectation. At the time of making this video, there are some countries that are not democratic, but they are allies of America, allies of the West, and the West is not saying anything about it. And so the West is very selective in terms of how they promote their version of governance and democracy. And so Iran has some sympathies, and in the same way that Israel has some sympathies. And as people are watching the war between Israel and Iran, and one of the sympathies that Africans have for Iran is the Gaddafi effect. What is the Gaddafi effect? We're talking about how America and the Western powers, they incited rebellion. They incited an uprising. The Arab Spring resulted in the fall of many Arab nations, and eventually they took Gaddafi out. And Gaddafi was a major Pan-Africanist, and he was trying to help the African continent, and he was trying to have an alternative to Western financial domination, and he was taken out. And people are still watching what is happening in Libya after Gaddafi was taken out. And there was a time that Minister Farrakhan, the leader of the nation of Islam, went to Libya, and Gaddafi gave him, or offered to give him, $1 billion to be used for projects that will empower Black Americans in America. And the president of America did not allow it. He didn't want Mr. Farrakhan to uh, get $1 billion from Gaddafi that will be used to help develop communities, Black communities uh, in in America. And so they remember the Gaddafi case, assassination of Gaddafi. And when you're talking about Africa, they have had a large share of assassinations. And don't forget the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, a nationalist who wanted to develop his country. He wanted Africa to be developed. Remember the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, the first Black nation to get independence from British colonial rule. Um, he was overthrown in 1966, and America and the CIA was involved in the assassination. In 1965, NATO had a special meeting on Kwame Nkrumah, and they planned his overthrow because he was a threat to Western interests in Africa. So when Iran is a threat to Western interests in the Middle East, when Iran becomes a threat to Western interests in the world, you have to remember that what is Western interest is not necessarily the interest of Africa. Of course, it is in the interest of the West for Africa to be underdeveloped, to be a hewer of wood and drawer of water, and be a theater for wars of destabilization, and so that the diamond, the gold, and the oil can be exploited. And you saw what France did to former colonies, and you saw how the West, America and France, how they are unhappy about the transformation going on in the Saharan regions of Africa, particularly Burkina Faso. The Iranian-Israeli war is about nuclear monopoly. Some nations have nuclear weapons, but it's okay for some nations to have nuclear weapons, but it is not okay for other nations to have nuclear weapons. And the Israelis' attack on Iran, June the 12th, 2025, it was to decapitate Iran and to destroy her nuclear facilities. In 1981, Israel did the same thing to Iraq, a preemptive strike on the Osirak nuclear facility in Iraq, and Iraq was accused of having weapons of mass destruction. You know the story, it was a lie, and it was a false flag allegation that resulted in America waging war against Iraq and overthrowing the government of Saddam Hussein, and eventually taking Saddam Hussein out, deleting Saddam Hussein from the earth. Nuclear monopoly. And when we talk about nuclear monopoly, Africa has a story to tell you. During the time of apartheid South Africa, South Africa had nuclear weapons. And the reason why they had nuclear weapons is that they wanted to have monopoly of power, and they were scared that blacks would get their independence. And as long as they had nuclear power, they will be able to maintain power. And they had the nuclear power because African nations, when they formed the Organization of African Unity, and they were fighting against apartheid in South Africa. And the apartheid regime in South Africa calculated that there will be a war, and the only way South Africa would defeat the total continent of Black Africa was if it had nuclear monopoly. And the racist Western governments agreed with the apartheid regime, and that is why a racist president like Ronald Reagan did not want South Africa to be independent. So there was a time that it was only apartheid South Africa that had nuclear weapons. And when South Africa got her independence, when Mandela came to power, what happened? The West dismantled the nuclear weapons in South Africa. And so there's an impression to you, Africa. It's okay for a white man to have nuclear weapons, but it is not okay for a black man to have nuclear weapons. This is the nuclear monopoly that I'm talking about. In the case of Africa, South Africa, under apartheid regime, controlled by the Afrikaners, had nuclear monopoly, and there was a secret relationship between apartheid South Africa and Israel. Both nations had nuclear weapons. Israel has nuclear weapons in the same way that apartheid South Africa had nuclear weapons. And here there's a war between Israel and Iran. It's about nuclear monopoly. So Africa has a case. Africa is watching with the world where there is an exclusive club, the nuclear club, and you don't fit to be among the nuclear club if you are a black nation. And that's why the West colluded to dismantle South Africa's nuclear facilities the first day South Africa lost the white minority rule, and the whites in South Africa had destroyed or dismantled the nuclear facilities before the black man came to rule South Africa. Iran is fighting Israel. Israel is fighting Iran. And war is very costly, it's very destructive. And Africa has a story to tell because Africa went through colonial and anti-colonial wars. And the nations in Southern Africa, particularly Mozambique, Angola, and South Africa, and even Zimbabwe, they fought protracted wars to gain their independence from Western colonial imperialist rule. And even after independence, the wars are still continuing, and the wars are instigated in the form of proxy wars where external forces are causing destabilization, because when the African nations are destabilized, and it will be an opportunity for the Western powers to exploit Africans' resources, to steal Africans' resources, and to enrich. They will do that to enrich themselves. And so Africa has war fatigue. Africa is tired fighting wars. Africa has been fighting wars throughout a period, colonial wars. Africa was subjugated by the imperialists, fighters. The imperialist forces, and the continent is tied, and so they don't want to see the war between Iran and Israel and having an impact on the continent, a continent that is already tired of war. And Africa will prefer not to take sides. Of course, as I said, they have sympathies for both countries, but the war has lessons for Africa, proxy wars leading to direct wars, and war about power and balance of power. And Western nations want power to be concentrated in the West, and they want to have exclusive right over nuclear weapons. And so the sympathy for Iran is there, that why will you destroy Iranian nuclear facility when Israel has nuclear weapons? When Pakistan has nuclear weapons, India has nuclear weapons, North Korea has nuclear weapons, China has it, America has it, England and France, they have nuclear weapons. So why not Iran? And that's the question. And that's the question that is being asked. Africa will be impacted by the war, particularly if the oil facilities in the Middle East are destroyed, and most African nations are oil importing, and so it will have effect on African economies. So the war has direct impact on Africa. The war going on between Iran and Israel is not just a military war, it's also a spiritual war. It is part of the New World Order, because left to the New World Order, left to the merchants of war, the military industrial intelligence complex ruling the world, including the United States, left to them, there will be war and millions will die, millions of people will die, and they will gain contract, they will win contracts to reconstruct the devastated economies. And not only that, if Iran is defeated, then Iran will be divided. It will be divided, and the spoils of war will be shared among the Western imperialist powers. Of course, they will have direct access to Iranian oil the same way that they had access to the Iraqi oil. There's a spiritual component of the war. It's a war setting the stage for the New World Order. The New World Order is the order of the Antichrist, and it is a war preparing for the coming of the Antichrist. And no wonder you see Israel being part of it. No wonder you see America being part of it. No wonder you see lawlessness emerging inside and outside Iran and Israel. Is all part of the New World Order. The stage is being set. The weapons of apocalypse, they are already manufactured, and the warmongers are testing their weapons, and they are waiting for their profits. The Iran war with Israel is a war of resistance. The Israeli war with Iran is a war of monopoly, monopoly over power, monopoly over nuclear power. And it can go nuclear, and when it goes nuclear, ultimately it will lead to events that I will call raptureable events. And here, Africa will have to watch and pray and watch for any raptureable events. And that's why my email is raptureafrica@yahoo.com. The Israeli war of Iran could be a raptureable event. And if you are living anywhere in the world, you have to know that prophecy is being fulfilled. Wars and rumors of wars will come. And here, proxy war has already resulted in direct war that potentially could go nuclear, because the war is about nuclear power. And that's why Israel preemptively attacked Iranian nuclear facilities. And potentially, it could be a raptureable event. And at long last, the will of the Lord will prevail. At long last, as I've said, the war, the First World War, the Second World War, led to realignment of power. And America became the hegemon of the world. But a time will come when global realignments will favor Africa. By revelation, Africa will last, and it will last, because the richest nation in the world in the end times will be an African nation located in West Africa. So as we are watching wars and rumors of war, those who trust in the Lord and those who will repent of their sins, and those who expect the coming of the Lord, waiting for the Messiah, they will laugh last, and they will laugh best. And so this is how Africa looks at the war between Israel and Iran. It's a war that will lead to realignment, and it is not anarchy. Everything is in place. Prophecy is being fulfilled, and the redemption of Africa and the Hebrew Israelites will come. And this is the message that I have for you. My email is raptureafrica@yahoo.com. Prepare yourself for any rapturable event, including the Israeli war with Iran. Thank you for watching this message.